The opening to the preface of a book called We Make the Road by Walking by Brian McLaren says this: You are not finished yet. You are in the making. You have the capacity to learn, mature, think, change, and grow. You also have the freedom to stagnate, regress, constrict, and lose your way. Which road will you take? What's true of you is also true for every community of people, including our spiritual communities. Like the individuals that constitute them, they are unfinished and in the making. They have the capacity to move forward if they choose, and the freedom to stagnate and regress. Which road will they follow in the years ahead? Does their future depend solely on the action or inaction of officials in the headquarters of religious bureaucracies? Do they rest? Do the rest of us have to wait until somebody somewhere figures things out and tells the rest of us what to do? I believe that all of us play a role in choosing and creating our futures, as individuals and as communities. We don't need to wait passively for history to happen to us. We can become protagonists of our own story. We can make the road by walking. Growing numbers of us believe that we are in the early stages of a new moment of emergence, pulsing with danger and promise. In this catalytic period, all of our spiritual traditions will be challenged and all will change, some negatively and reactively, tightening like angry fists, and others positively and constructively, opening like extended arms. More and more of us want to participate in that positive and constructive opening. We want to explore new possibilities, to develop unfulfilled potential, to discover new resources, to bless, to inspire, to enliven. We don't shrink back from the moments we feel God is calling us to walk into with faith, hope, and love. I really enjoyed that opening line to that opening section of McLaren's book, and it resonated with me because everywhere I go, and constantly in my email inbox and live stream Q&As, and just it feels like every interaction that I have with listeners of the podcast or people connected to our ministry or supporters and donors, there is this sense that we all want to be a part of something that's can it just be simple and full of life and goodness? Why can't we just be a part? Why is it always so complicated and so programmatic and so and for many of us we are a part of churches that we love. Like, we love these communities of faith. A lot of these conversations are not anti-church. It's just there's this other piece that we feel like we're missing. For others, maybe a smaller group, we're in churches that we don't want to leave. We're in churches that we might not love them right now. They're frustrating. But we also have no interest in leaving. We're not looking for excuses to go somewhere. We want to stay, but if we're going to stay, we need to be able to find something that we just don't feel like we're able to find. For some people, they have left. Or maybe they never even showed up at a church, and they have no interest in doing so. Some people have left with unbelievable trauma and hurt. Some people have no interest, and quite frankly, some of them probably shouldn't darken the door of a church, at least for the next season. And but they too want to follow Jesus, and those conversations, they grip me too, because I want these people to have just as much access to Jesus and be able to say yes to him and follow him without having to go through the gatekeepers of a church institution. I think Jesus is bigger than our institutions. I think Jesus is bigger than our traditions. I think Jesus is bigger than our faith expressions. And I think Jesus can be found by anybody wanting to run after him. And so I've been wanting for a while to be able to facilitate these conversations, do something with this. And something that could we create a resource that would be helpful for all of these voices in all of these spaces, differing spaces, something that could be used by anybody, anywhere, to help them build community and pursue Jesus in community with other people. And so that's what we have wanted to create. And so I asked Reed Dent a couple of years ago, before Reed was even a part of the BEMA teaching team. You'll meet him in session 6 if you haven't already. But even before Reed was a part, I asked Reed if he would help me work on a liturgy, something that would take us through an entire 12-month church calendar, 4 seasons of the church calendar, and just help guide a conversation, something that a group of people could gather around. I don't care whether they're in a church or in a church but not involved, or involved in a church or not involved in a church at all, or want nothing to do with the church. Anybody that wanted to gather around the scriptures and the person of Jesus and facilitate more thriving. Could we create that? And so we've been working on that liturgy, and it's designed to be used in any and all circumstances. I'll read just another little bit. And by the way, the reason why I have this book here is I unashamedly and without question was inspired to make this liturgy after reading this. That's what this book is. This really isn't a book. This is a liturgy that Brian McLaren wrote. It's 52 chapters, a chapter for every single week of the calendar year, and it's designed to do exactly. And I looked at that and I said, I love that. I think I could do something similar. And so I have absolutely kind of stolen the idea and the template for what we'll do out of this. So you should get your own copy of this. Maybe this is better than anything that we'll do. But I also believe that if you are listening to the podcast, that I thought it would be fun to have a liturgy that used some of the same language, had some of the same handles and the same ideas. You will not have to listen to the podcast to be able to appreciate the liturgy. If people were not podcast listeners, if you have people that are like, they're just not going to listen to the podcast, they're just not into that kind of study, but they too want to gather around something organic and simple and refined and live out their faith in that way, well, then this will work for them. If there will be people that probably start with the liturgy and then find the podcast. There will be people that have been with the podcast forever, and maybe they weren't even able to finish it, but they'll find that this was actually what they were looking for. And there will be people that love the podcast, listen to it every single week, and still find this to be a helpful resource and an add-on to that experience. So this does not require, it's a completely free-floating resource designed to help people through the language and the paradigm of BEMA. But so I'm reading little excerpts out of here that I found to be so helpful. In this, he talked about one of the things he wanted to do with his liturgy was have a liturgy of aliveness. He said he felt like there was such a stagnant, kind of stuck spiritual experience for so many of us in our Christian faith. And he said, I wanted a liturgy that would inspire something alive. And so he says this: meanwhile, aliveness itself is under threat at every turn. We have created an economic system that is not only too big to fail, it's too big to control, and perhaps too big to understand as well. The system disproportionately benefits the most powerful and privileged, 1% of the human species, bestowing upon them unprecedented comfort, security, and luxury. To do so, it destabilizes the climate, plunders the planet, and kills off other forms of life at unprecedented rates. The rest, especially the poorest third at the bottom, gain little and lose much as this economic pyramid grows taller and taller. One of their greatest losses is democracy, as those at the top find clever ways to buy votes, turning elected governments into their puppets. Under these circumstances, you would think that at least those at the top would experience aliveness, but they don't. They bend under constant anxiety and pressure to produce, earn, compete, maintain, protect, hoard, and consume more and more, faster and faster. They lose the connection and well-being that comes from seeking the common good. This is not an economy of aliveness for anyone. As these tensions mount, we wake up every morning wondering what fool or fiend will be the next to throw a little match or an assault, a nuclear, chemical, a biological weapon onto the dry tinder of resentment and fear. Again, this is a formula for death, not a recipe for life. And I like that. But I also know that some people aren't going to love McLaren's voice to lead them on that journey. That's okay. I get that. I have always been very inspired by Brian McLaren, but I know that he's not everybody's cup of tea as well. So I wanted to do something relatively similar. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a liturgy. We're going to launch it this August. So it will launch the weekend of August 27th, 28th. That's a Saturday, Sunday. People might choose to gather on Saturdays. People might choose to gather on Sundays. People might choose to gather any other day of the week. But we will post a weekly liturgy that will guide an experience for each week, starting with that. That will be the week of the 27th, 28th, and the days that follow. And every week will have its own liturgy. We'll talk more about the mechanics of this and how it will literally function in a later video, but we're looking forward to launch that and wanted to kind of get the idea marinating in your mind so that as summer starts to approach here, you might be talking to some of your friends and you might have a few months to kind of prepare or whatever you might want to as August gets closer, so that when we launch it, you have a group that's ready to rock and roll. So we'll be talking more and more about the mechanics, but I also wanted to be very, very clear in this discussion what we're not doing. And I would really echo something that McLaren said in his book as well. And I tried to be clear about this earlier, but I'm going to start my video here. I'm also going to end my video here. Based on this format, some might wonder if I'm recommending learning circles gathered around this resource as an alternative to traditional churches. Is what we're trying to do is start a new church? My answer first is a firm no. Whenever possible, I would hope that these simple learning circles would be supplemental to participation in a traditional congregation or denomination, as it was in early monastic or Methodist movements, and Catholicism or Anglicanism. In fact, I would be thrilled for pastors and traditional congregations to use these 52-plus sermons, along with the accompanying simple liturgy and Bible reading plan, as a year-long template for spiritual formation, reorientation, activation in traditional church settings. But this won't always be possible. So my second answer is a maybe yes. I hope that we make the road by walking will facilitate the spontaneous formation of grassroots learning circles that can bring together people who don't feel welcome or wanted in conventional churches. I would discourage these self-organizing groups from using the word church to describe what they're doing, at least initially. I would agree with that. A lot of unintended pressure, baggage, expectation, criticism, and complications can come along with that word. Eventually, spontaneously formed learning circles may find existing congregations or denominations that will welcome them. Maybe they will eventually choose to use the word church to name what they have become. In the spiritual life, as in all life, it's better to have the substance without the label than the label without the substance. And I just wanted to double down on some of those thoughts. What we're trying to do with this liturgy is not counteract anything taking place in your local churches. If your local church works for you on any level, we want this to come alongside of and supplement something. Let me be so crystal clear about this idea. We are not a church. I am not your pastor. And I know that everybody's like, oh, but in a lot of ways you are, and I don't have a church and all that stuff. My God-ordained call as somebody who works with BEMA and produces content and resources is not to be your pastoral presence. That's a whole different, very sacred calling that God would place on my life. What we're trying to do is create resources that we can send out, decentralize. We are not trying to pull you into us or to me. We're trying to give stuff away so that the Spirit of God can work in you out there. I am not your pastor. This is not a church. I know a lot of you take part in things like house churches and stuff like that, and that's fine. I'm not here to critique that or anything like that, but I am not trying to start house churches. I have no interest in starting a movement. That's not what I'm doing. Whatever the Spirit of God does in you and through you, that is great, and I will celebrate that. But I will not be the one trying to lead that kind of a movement. That's not what we're doing here. We're wanting to equip God's people with resources that help us lead. Like he said in the earlier quote, do we have to wait around for everybody else? Like, do we have to wait for all of our pastors and our denominational leaders and do we have to wait for everybody else to figure out what to do? Or are we free to just follow Jesus? To make a simple liturgy, to gather around the Word of God and be the people that God has invited us to become? I think the answer is yes, we can do that. We don't have to wait. But I do not want to start something else or fracture existing churches. I hope, just like McLaren said, I hope that there will be churches that might find this to be a useful tool and want to start one of these groups or a couple groups in their own church. I hope that there are groups that can use this in such a way that it's not divisive and simply comes along and truly supplements their place and their involvement in the church that they're already a part of. But then there are so many others who don't have a church and want to follow Jesus with others. And it is my deep desire that they could find themselves equipped and empowered to do that through this resource. And even with them, I am not your pastor. I'm a great voice, hopefully, a resource that you can use, a friend, and somebody who will encourage you. But God has not given me the call to pastor you and to steward your spiritual formation under my leadership. I just want to simply facilitate those things and let God do what God will through his community. You are where the power lies. If we can help find a way to gather that and release that, amen. That's what we're wanting to do. So we look forward to launching this idea this fall. If it's helpful for folks, we're going to have a website that hosts the liturgy. There will be a video at the beginning of every season, and then every week we'll just have a PDF that can guide you through your own liturgy and discussion. So our next video, we'll talk more about the mechanics of how the liturgy will actually function. And right now, some of you are like, I don't even know what it will look like. I don't even know what you're talking about. That will come next video. But if you're interested in being able to gather together with a group, and I know we have BEMA discussion groups, that's something different. Getting together to study the Bible, to listen to the podcast and talk about it, that's not the same thing as fellowship. Getting together, and this is a group that could work right alongside of your BEMA group. This is a group that's going to foster true fellowship and community and a living out. And maybe your BEMA group is that, and you don't even need this. That's great. But our hope is that this would foster a different kind of experience, a different kind of fellowship, and a different kind of community as we live and pursue those things together. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer those. But we just kind of wanted to introduce the idea, announce it, kind of launch the idea out there. We'll look forward to launching the liturgy this fall, and we'll talk more later. Okay? Until then, see you then.